Let me ask you something that may sting. What if the very thing that made people love you was also the very thing destroying you? What if your kindness, your endless giving, your constant need to heal everyone around you was the exact reason you felt drained, unappreciated, and misunderstood? And here's the shocking truth. The moment an empath refuses to please everyone anymore, their world doesn't just shift, it explodes. Friendships change. Family dynamics unravel. Relationships expose their true foundations. Because when the empath stops bending, those who depended on their bending have no choice but to show who they really are. This isn't just about boundaries. It's about transformation. It's about an empath finally stepping out of the archetype that Carl Jung warned about, the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who saves others while bleeding themselves dry. But here's the part nobody talks about. When you stop pleasing everyone, you don't just lose people, you gain yourself. And the self you discover is far more powerful, mysterious, and uncheckable than the version who kept everyone else happy. So let's begin. The psychology of pleasing empaths are naturally wired to feel the emotions of others like they're their own. It's not a choice. It's a sensitivity that runs deep in the nervous system. When someone around you feels hurt, you feel it in your body. When someone's angry, you sense it before they even open their mouth. Now, imagine living with that sensitivity since childhood. What happens? You start to notice patterns. When you keep others happy, your environment feels safe. When you disappoint people, conflict erupts and the energy becomes unbearable. So you learn unconsciously, if I keep everyone pleased, I will be safe. This is where the people-pleasing archetype is born. It's not weakness. It's survival. But what begins as survival often turns into identity. Suddenly, you're not just someone who helps. You become the helper. The one who absorbs, heals, fixes, sacrifices. But here's the truth nobody tells you. When you're always the healer, you deny yourself the right to be human. You deny yourself anger. You deny yourself sadness. You deny yourself the right to say no, and slowly, piece by piece, your soul starts disappearing behind the masks of others. The breaking point. Every empath reaches a breaking point. Sometimes it comes in the form of burnout, the sheer exhaustion of carrying everyone else's pain. Sometimes it comes in betrayal, when the very people you sacrificed for turn on you, showing you that your giving was never truly valued. And sometimes it comes in silence. That moment late at night when you realize, I've been here for everyone. But who's here for me? That's the moment of awakening. It's not glamorous. It's not even loud. It's quiet, almost sacred. A whisper in your own soul that says, I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep disappearing just to keep others comfortable. Carl Jung believed that every individual eventually faces the confrontation with the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress to maintain an image. For the empath, the shadow is not cruelty or selfishness. It's the simple truth of having needs, having limits, and daring to put those first. But here's the twist. When the empath starts to honor that shadow, when they stop pleasing everyone, the world around them doesn't applaud. It resists. It pushes back. The shockwaves of refusal. The first time you tell someone no, you'll feel a storm rise in the air. Suddenly, the friend who always called you at midnight for support is offended that you need rest. The coworker who leaned on you for every crisis suddenly gossips that you're different now. The family member who expected blind loyalty accuses you of being selfish. Because your refusal disrupts their comfort. For years, they've grown accustomed to your availability, your silence, your compliance. When you shift, they feel abandoned. But what they're really losing is not you. They're losing their ability to use you without resistance. This next truth will shock you. The moment you stop pleasing everyone, you begin to see who was actually connected to you and who was only connected to the benefits of you. And yes, this revelation hurts. But it's also liberation. Because finally, you're not surrounded by masks anymore. You're surrounded by truth. The empath's inner conflict, of course, it's not easy. Every empath feels guilt the first time they stop pleasing others. You'll hear the echo of old programming. If I don't help, I'm a bad person. You'll feel that inner tug of war, One part of you longing to set boundaries, another terrified of being unloved if you do, but Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You were never meant to be a hollow mirror reflecting everyone else's needs. You were meant to be a full self with your own path, your own desires, your own fire. Think of it this way. If a candle spends its whole life lighting other candles, but never protects its own flame, it burns out. And when it's gone, no one can light from it again. Protecting your flame is not selfishness. It's responsibility. The new energy that emerges, and here's the beautiful paradox. When the empath stops pleasing everyone, they don't become cold. They don't become unkind. They actually become more authentic, more powerful, more magnetic. Why? Because people are drawn not to the endless giver, but to the soul who radiates wholeness. Suddenly, you have energy again. Suddenly, your yes actually means something because it's not automatic. Suddenly, your presence feels deeper, more grounded, more real. And here's the part nobody talks about. When you stop pleasing everyone, you give others permission to stop performing too. Your authenticity creates a ripple effect. The world doesn't just lose a servant. It gains a mirror of courage. Rehook. But wait until you hear this. Refusing to please everyone doesn't just change your relationships. It changes your entire identity. It calls forth parts of you that were buried for years, maybe even decades. And when these parts rise, the empath doesn't just become different. They become unstoppable. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the real reason you kept pleasing everyone wasn't just about kindness, but about fear? Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as selfish. And here's the shocking truth. When the empath finally refuses to please, they don't just battle with others. They battle with themselves. Because deep inside every empath lives a shadow, the repressed parts of the self that were locked away long ago. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow is not evil in itself. It's simply the parts of the psyche we deny. For empaths, those denied parts often look like anger, desire, and the radical right to put oneself first. But here's the part nobody talks about. When those denied parts finally break through, they don't just whisper. They roar. The hidden anger of the empath. Most people think empaths are gentle, soft, endlessly forgiving. And often they are. But what no one realizes is that beneath that calm surface often lies suppressed rage. Not the chaotic rage of destruction, but the righteous anger of someone who's been ignored, used, and silenced for years. Think about it. How many times have you swallowed your own truth to keep peace? How many times did you say, it's okay, when it wasn't? How many times did you cry in private after smiling in public? That anger didn't disappear. It went underground into the unconscious. And when you stop pleasing, it rises like a flood. This next truth will shock you. The empath's anger is not their weakness. It's their compass. It points toward every place they've been dishonored, every boundary crossed, every wound ignored. It's the shadow's way of saying, this is where you lost yourself. This is where you must reclaim your power. The denied selfishness. Now here's the paradox. From childhood, many empaths were told that selfishness was bad. Maybe they had a sibling who took up all the space, so they learned to take none. Maybe they grew up in a family where love was conditional, where being good meant sacrificing your own needs. So they buried their selfishness deep in the shadow. They learned to live for others, to anticipate every mood, to give before being asked. But the cost? They forgot what they actually wanted. When the empath stops pleasing everyone, that denied selfishness comes alive. Suddenly you feel a strange desire to rest instead of fix. To pursue your own dreams instead of carrying everyone else's. To say, no, I don't want that. I want this. At first, it feels wrong. Guilt creeps in, whispering, you're becoming selfish. But here's the hidden truth. This isn't selfishness. It's selfhood. It's not about taking more. It's about finally claiming what was always yours to begin with. The right to live for yourself. The empath's power awakens when anger and denied selfishness merge. Something extraordinary happens. The empath steps into power. Not the manipulative power of the narcissist. Not the shallow power of control. but the deep, grounded power of authenticity. Think of a tree. For years, you were like a tree bending in every direction to protect the birds nesting in your branches. But when you stop pleasing, you stop bending. You grow straight, rooted, unshakable. Some birds fly away. Others stay. But the tree no longer loses itself in the storm. That's the empath's power, the ability to stand firm without apology, to say yes and mean it, to say no and not explain it, to be both compassionate and unmovable. But here's the part nobody talks about. This power scares people. It even scares the empath themselves at first. Because for so long, power was associated with the abuser, the manipulator, the narcissist. So when the empath feels their own power rising, they wonder, am I becoming like them? The answer is no. True power doesn't exploit. It liberates. The world's reaction, of course, not everyone will celebrate this awakening. Some will resist it violently, not with fists, but with guilt trips, accusations, and subtle manipulation. The narcissist in particular cannot stand it. For them, the empath was not just a person. They were a supply source, a mirror, a vessel for validation. When the empath stops playing that role, the narcissist feels exposed, empty, even enraged. Friends may distance themselves. Family may call you changed. Partners may accuse you of being cold. But here's the next truth. You must hold on to these reactions are not proof you're wrong. They're proof you've stepped into truth. The battle within now. Let's return to the inner battle. Because while the outside world reacts, the empath's hardest fight is inside. There's guilt. The heavy kind that says, if you love them, you would keep giving. There's fear. The whisper that says, if you stop pleasing, you'll be alone. And there's doubt. The voice that says, maybe I am too much now. Maybe I should go back. But here's where Jung's wisdom cuts through the fog. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath's task is not to reject their shadow. It's to embrace it, to see anger as sacred, to see selfishness as balance, to see refusal as freedom. Only then does the empath rise, not as a martyr, not as a savior, but as a whole human being, a story of transformation. Let me give you an example. Imagine Sarah, an empath who has spent years being the glue in her family. She answers every late-night call, lends money she doesn't have, cancels her own plans to soothe everyone else's crises. She believes it's love, but one day she burns out. She realizes she's sick, broke, and utterly invisible. So she does something radical. She says, no more. I cannot keep doing this. At first, chaos erupts. Her family accuses her of being selfish. Her friends drift away. The phone grows silent. Sarah feels guilty, lost, almost haunted, but then something changes. She starts painting again, a hobby she abandoned years ago. She starts sleeping deeply for the first time in months. She starts laughing, not the polite laugh for others, but the belly laugh of someone alive. Soon, new people enter her life. Not ones who drain her, but ones who celebrate her. She realizes that by refusing to please everyone, she didn't lose love. She found true connection. This next truth will shock you. When the empath stops pleasing, they stop attracting users. And start attracting equals rehook. But wait until you hear this. The empath's transformation doesn't just reshape their relationships. It reshapes destiny. Because the moment they stop living for others, they unlock a path that was hidden all along. Let me start with a question. What if the life you thought you were supposed to live was only a disguise, and your real path couldn't be revealed until you stopped living for everyone else? Here's the shocking truth. When the empath refuses to please everyone anymore, they don't just change relationships. They alter their destiny. They step out of the script others wrote for them, and for the first time, they begin to write their own. Carl Jung believed that every human life has a secret purpose, a direction of growth that the soul longs to unfold. But he also warned that most people never reach it because they get trapped in roles, masks, and unconscious patterns. For the empath, that role is clear: the pleaser, the fixer, the self-sacrificing giver. But here's the part nobody talks about. The moment you refuse that role, Your life doesn't just shift. It reveals the hidden path you were meant to walk all along. The collapse of the old identity for years. Your identity may have revolved around keeping peace. Maybe people even praised you for it. You're so kind. You're always there. You never complain, but what looks like praise is often a prison. Because behind those compliments lies expectation. You were expected to show up, to absorb, to understand. And so you wore the mask of the eternal giver. When you stop pleasing, that mask shatters. And the shattering is terrifying. You may feel like you've lost who you are. You may wonder, if I'm not the one who keeps everyone else together, then who am I? But here's the hidden gift. That collapse is not the end of you. It's the beginning. Because now, with the mask gone, the true self has room to breathe. The return of forgotten desires. Think back to childhood. Before the world taught you to please, what lit you up? Was it art? Adventure? Curiosity? A hunger to learn, to explore, to create? Those desires didn't disappear. They went underground, buried beneath years of service to others. But the moment you stop pleasing, they start to surface again. Suddenly, you remember dreams you abandoned, passions you silenced, longings you ignored. It may feel strange, even selfish, to pursue them. But these are not random impulses. They are breadcrumbs leading you toward your destiny. This next truth will shock you. The empath's destiny isn't found in endless giving. It's found in authentic becoming, the hero's journey of the empath. Joseph Campbell spoke of the hero's journey, the universal pattern where a character leaves the familiar world, faces trials and returns transformed. For the empath, refusing to please is that first, daring step out of the familiar. It's the call to adventure. And like every hero, you will face resistance. The world will try to pull you back. Fear will whisper. But if you keep walking, you will find not just freedom, but purpose. Carl Jung saw individuation, the process of becoming whole, as humanity's greatest task. And for the empath, individuation begins when they refuse to live as a fragment for others. When they claim their whole being, they awaken the archetype of the healer in its highest form, not the wounded healer who bleeds for everyone, but the integrated healer who radiates wholeness, the ripple effect. Here's the part nobody talks about. When an empath steps into this new self, the effects ripple outward. Think of it like this. When you were pleasing everyone, you were keeping the surface calm, but beneath it, resentment and exhaustion brewed. Your presence may have soothed others, but it also enabled dysfunction. When you stop pleasing, you disrupt that surface calm. Yes, it creates tension, but it also forces others to face themselves. Suddenly, they can't project all their pain onto you. They can't rely on you as a crutch. They must take responsibility. Your refusal becomes their mirror. And while some will resist, others will grow. This next truth will shock you. By refusing to please, you don't just free yourself, you give others the chance to evolve. The new relationships that appear. Of course, not everyone will rise with you. Some connections will fall away, but that's the beauty of it. Because when the wrong people leave, the right ones finally have room to arrive. Suddenly, you begin to attract relationships based not on need but on mutual respect. People who value your no as much as your yes. People who don't see you as a tool, but as a whole person. And here's the paradox. The less you please, the more magnetic you become. Because authenticity shines brighter than any mask. People may not always like it, but they can't ignore it. The empath's new path. So what happens next? The empath begins to carve a life that actually belongs to them. It might mean creating. It might mean teaching. It might mean walking away from toxic environments. It might even mean silence. The radical act of choosing peace for yourself, whatever form it takes. The common thread is this: you are no longer living reactively. You are no longer waiting for others to dictate who you are. You are choosing consciously who you will be, and that choice is destiny in motion. Story of becoming. Let me give you an example. David spent years as the dependable friend. Whenever someone needed help moving, borrowing money, or crying at 3 a.m., David was there. Everyone loved him, but no one really saw him. One day, exhausted and broken, he stopped. He told his friends, "I can't keep being everything for everyone." Most drifted away. At first, David felt abandoned, but slowly he began writing again, something he'd loved as a child. Years later, that writing became a book. That book touched lives far beyond his circle. David realized that his destiny wasn't to carry people's immediate burdens. It was to share words that lifted them toward their own healing. And here's the part nobody talks about. If David had kept pleasing everyone, he never would have touched the destiny that was waiting for him all along. Rehook. But wait until you hear this. The empath's destiny is not just about finding themselves. It's about facing the one thing they've been avoiding their entire life, their own shadow. And when they embrace it fully, they don't just heal, they transform. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than words? When an empath decides to stop explaining themselves, to stop justifying why they no longer bend, the room gets heavier. People who once relied on the empath's endless understanding suddenly feel the vacuum of accountability closing in on them. And here's the secret nobody talks about. It's not the empath who changes the most, it's everyone around them. The shift exposes things that were always there but kept hidden by the empath's willingness to carry the emotional burden. When the empath stops pleasing, the narcissist loses their power. Control thrives in imbalance, one person endlessly giving, the other endlessly taking. But once the empath says no, the script flips. Suddenly, the narcissist's charm looks hollow, their manipulation looks desperate, and their rage looks childish. Jung once suggested that the persona, the mask we show the world, cracks under pressure. For narcissists, that crack becomes a floodgate. Without someone to constantly validate them, they are forced to face their own shadow. And that terrifies them. But wait until you hear this, because it doesn't end with narcissists. Even the so-called kind people in the empath's life can react poorly. Friends, co-workers, even family members who enjoyed the ease of being around someone who never said no suddenly find themselves uncomfortable. Why? Because the empath's boundaries force them to look at their own patterns of entitlement. And people don't like mirrors that reflect their hidden flaws. Here's a metaphor to make it clear. Imagine the empath as a candle lighting up a dark room. For years, that light made everyone comfortable. It was warm, safe, predictable. But one day, the candle decides it no longer wants to burn itself out for others. It dims, conserving its flame. Instantly, the room grows cold and shadows stretch across the walls. People panic not because the empath did something wrong, but because they had grown addicted to the light. They never thought about bringing their own candle. That's what happens when an empath stops pleasing. The whole environment shifts. But here's the part nobody talks about. The empath's silence becomes its own form of power. For years, their yes was taken for granted. Now, their no has weight. It shakes people to the core. It forces them to ask questions they avoided for years. Why did I expect so much from them? Why couldn't I stand on my own? Why do I feel entitled to their energy? And the deeper truth is this: most people don't like the answers. Think about the empath who has always been the peacemaker in the family. Every holiday, every argument, every minor feud was smoothed over by their words, their patience, their ability to absorb tension. But when they stop, the unresolved conflicts resurface. Old resentments bubble up. Suddenly, the family realizes the peace wasn't real, it was just borrowed energy from the empath. Jung would call this a projection. The family projected their unresolved chaos onto the empath, expecting them to carry it. Without that carrier, the truth stands naked. Here's something that will shock you. The empath refusing to please is actually one of the most radical forms of healing a family system can experience. It exposes dysfunction at its roots. It forces growth. It pulls people out of denial. But healing doesn't always feel like healing at first. It feels like chaos, rejection, even betrayal. And that's why so many empaths struggle when they first stop saying yes. They confuse people's resistance with a sign that they are wrong. In reality, it's confirmation that they are finally disrupting the unhealthy patterns. But let me give you a story, because theory only goes so far. Imagine Sarah, an empath who always dropped everything for her friends. Middle of the night, she'd answer the phone. Financial trouble? She'd lend money. Emotional crisis? She'd sit for hours listening, even if it left her drained. For years, her friends adored her. But then Sarah began therapy. She started journaling, practicing shadow work, realizing how her constant pleasing was rooted in childhood fears of abandonment. Slowly, she began to say no. She stopped answering every late-night call. She stopped loaning money she couldn't afford to give. She even began asking for help in return. And what happened? Some friends vanished. They labeled her selfish, others tried guilt trips. But a few, the real ones, adjusted, respected her boundaries, and grew closer. What Sarah realized is this: the moment she stopped pleasing, her world reorganized itself around truth. She lost what wasn't real, but she kept and strengthened what was. Now here's the deeper mystery. When the empath refuses to please, they unlock a new level of personal power. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That's exactly what happens. Pleasing kept the empath trapped in a false identity, an identity shaped by fear and expectation. Saying no begins the journey back to authenticity. But wait, this next truth will shock you. Many empaths fear that saying no will make them lonely. But in reality, it's what finally attracts their soul tribe. The people who stick around are the ones who see the empath not for what they provide, but for who they are. Boundaries act like a filter, clearing out the takers, leaving space for genuine connection. Loneliness might come first, but it's the emptiness that clears the stage for something real. And here's the paradox. The more the empath refuses to please, the more their presence is actually respected. Because respect doesn't come from giving endlessly, it comes from balance. The empath begins to radiate a different kind of energy. Not desperate, not needy, but whole. And that energy is magnetic. Think of it like a musical instrument. When an empath pleases endlessly, they are like a piano that anyone can pound on, playing whatever tune they want. But when the empath claims their boundaries, they become the musician, the one who decides the rhythm, the melody, the harmony. People don't just play them, they listen to them. That's the transformation. So the real question is this: what happens when you stop burning yourself out to keep others warm? What happens when you finally choose yourself? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. You lose the illusion, but you gain the truth. You stop being everyone's savior and you start being your own. And in that choice, you discover the most shocking revelation of all. You were never meant to please everyone, you were meant to awaken them. What if I told you that the moment an empath stops pleasing everyone, the world around them suddenly reveals its true face? Not the polished one people wear in public, not the smiles and polite gestures, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who people really are. Because here's the secret: when you are no longer useful to others, their masks slip. And what you see in that moment can either break you or free you. Let's sit with that for a second. For years, the empath's role was to be the soft landing place for other people's disappointments, anger, and fear. They became the shock absorber of human emotion. And as long as they fulfilled that role, people treated them with affection, even admiration. But the moment the empath stops, the affection often turns to hostility. The admiration fades into criticism. Why? Because people weren't valuing the empath for who they were. They were valuing them for the function they served. And once that function disappears, the illusion shatters. But here's the part nobody talks about. This is the most liberating moment in an empath's life. Why? Because it separates truth from performance. It shows who was really there for them and who was there only for the benefit. Jung once said that we don't truly know a person until we've seen how they behave when they don't get what they want. That's exactly what happens when an empath refuses to please. The world reveals its shadow. Think of it like a storm blowing through a forest. At first, it looks destructive. Branches snap, weak trees fall, the landscape changes. But after the storm clears, only the strongest trees remain standing. In the same way, when an empath says no, many relationships collapse. But the ones that survive? Those are the real ones, strong, rooted, true. But wait until you hear this. Many empaths are unprepared for the backlash. The first time they say no, guilt floods their system like a wave. Old childhood conditioning whispers, "You're being selfish. You're unkind." They'll leave you. It's not just about the present moment, it's about the wound. Because here's the shocking truth. Most empaths were trained to please long before they even knew the word. As children, their survival often depended on it. Maybe they had parents who were emotionally volatile, so they learned to stay quiet, kind, and adaptable. Maybe they had caregivers who rewarded them only when they sacrificed themselves. That conditioning dug deep grooves in their psyche. Saying yes became more than a habit, it became a survival strategy. And here's where Jung's concept of the shadow enters again. The empath's shadow is their own hidden resentment, their suppressed anger, the part of them that secretly longs to scream no, but swallows it down. For years, they bury it, telling themselves they're being good, but shadows don't stay buried forever. The day comes when that repressed part rises, demanding to be acknowledged. And when the empath finally refuses to please, that's not weakness, it's integration. It's the shadow finally stepping into the light, but here's something even deeper. Many empaths believe that saying no will make them unlovable. But the paradox is the opposite. Saying no makes them more authentic, and authenticity is magnetic. People may resist it at first, but in time, they respect it even if they don't admit it openly. Think about it. Who do you admire more? The person who bends over backwards to make everyone happy, or the person who knows who they are, who can say yes or no with clarity, without guilt? The latter, always. Because boundaries are not walls, they are doors. And only the right people walk through them. Let me tell you a story. Michael, an empath in his 30s, had spent his entire career overextending himself at work. He stayed late, picked up other people's slack, never asked for recognition. His coworkers loved him, but in a shallow way. They loved that he made their lives easier. Then one day, Michael hit burnout. He realized he was sacrificing his health, his peace, his dreams just to be liked. So he started saying no. No to extra projects. No to unpaid overtime. No to being the silent rescuer. What happened? At first, his coworkers resented him. They whispered, "He's changed." His boss questioned his team spirit, but over time, Michael noticed something shocking. His boundaries forced others to step up. The workplace rebalanced itself. And instead of being invisible, Michael became respected. People no longer saw him as a doormat, they saw him as a man with self-worth. His refusal to please redefined his identity, but here's the part nobody wants to admit. When empaths stop pleasing, they also face their own shadow of anger. Years of swallowed resentment rise to the surface. At first, it feels overwhelming, even frightening. But Jung would say this is necessary. Anger isn't the enemy, the compass. It shows where your boundaries were crossed, where your needs were ignored, where your soul whispered, "Enough." When an empath honors that anger, not by exploding but by listening, they transform it into clarity. It stops being destructive and becomes directive. Wait until you hear this next truth, it will shock you. The empath refusing to please is not just a personal act. It's a collective disruption. Why? Because the world relies on empaths to keep things running smoothly. In families, in workplaces, in communities, empaths are the unspoken glue. When they stop, systems shake. Power dynamics crumble. The narcissist loses control. The entitled friend gets exposed. The exploitative boss gets challenged. This isn't just about one person, it's about breaking cycles that have lasted generations. But here's the gift. Once the empath survives the initial storm, life opens in ways they never imagined. They discover energy they didn't know they had. Creativity bursts forth because no longer is it drained by others' demands. Their health improves, less stress, fewer sleepless nights, a body no longer in constant tension. Relationships deepen because now people connect with the empath for who they are, not for what they provide. And most importantly, the empath discovers themselves. For the first time, they can ask, what do I want? What brings me joy? What feels true for me? Questions that were once buried under the weight of everyone else's needs. Think of it like a river. For years, the empath's energy flowed outward, watering everyone else's gardens. But their own soil grew dry, cracked, barren. When they stop pleasing, they redirect the current. Their own roots drink deeply. Their own flowers bloom. And here's the irony, only then can they truly give again, but from overflow, not from depletion. So the real challenge is this. Can the empath withstand the storm of backlash long enough to reach the calm on the other side? Because here's the mystery, on the other side of no lies freedom. On the other side of guilt lies peace. And on the other side of people's rejection lies the truest form of love, love that doesn't demand performance. Love that doesn't vanish when you stop pleasing, love that sees you fully, deeply, as you are, and maybe that's the final truth Jung would want us to hold on to. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires breaking the illusions that bind us. For the empath, that illusion is the belief that their worth lies in pleasing others. The refusal to play that role is not selfish. It is the first real step toward becoming free. What if I told you that the first no an empath gives is not just a word, it's a revolution? It's the crack in the system where light enters, the fracture in the facade that reveals what has been hidden all along. Because the truth is, when an empath stops pleasing, they are no longer playing the role that others depended on. And roles, once broken, reveal reality. But here's the part nobody talks about. The backlash is not just external, it's internal. The world's anger is easier to face than the empath's own inner critic. That voice inside whispers, "You're unkind. You've changed. You're letting people down." It's the old conditioning resurfacing like a ghost. And this ghost is powerful because it was born in childhood. The empath as a child learned that safety, love, and belonging were conditional, given only when they pleased. Saying no now awakens the terror of abandonment buried in their nervous system. But here's the shocking truth, this inner backlash is not the enemy. It is the test. It is the psyche's way of asking, do you want to remain in the old pattern, or do you want to grow? Carl Jung said that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The guilt, the fear, the trembling after saying no, this is the birth pain of a new self. It is the death of the people-pleaser and the birth of the authentic soul. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a butterfly breaking free from its cocoon. At first, the wings are fragile, wet, trembling. It looks weak, vulnerable, but if it retreats back into the cocoon, it will die. It must endure the vulnerability long enough to dry its wings. The empath is the same. That first no feels fragile, terrifying, uncertain. But if they retreat back into pleasing, they suffocate. They never grow wings. The choice is simple: endure the temporary discomfort or remain forever trapped. Wait until you hear this. Many empaths, after saying no, are shocked at who vanishes from their life. Friends they've known for years stop calling. Family members pull away. Colleagues turn cold. At first, this feels devastating, but in reality, it is the great purification. People who only valued the empath for their compliance are naturally stripped away. What remains is gold, the rare relationships that survive the storm. These are the ones worth keeping, the ones that see the empath not as a resource, but as a person. But let's go deeper. Jung believed that the unconscious drives our patterns until we make them conscious. People-pleasing is not random, it is unconscious programming. It is the child who decided, if I'm good, I'll be safe. But when the empath refuses to please, they bring that unconscious bargain into the light. They begin to see the lie. Safety purchased at the cost of self is not safety at all. It is slavery. And freedom requires breaking the contract. This next truth will shock you. When an empath stops pleasing, they often experience an identity crisis. Because who are they, if not the fixer, the healer, the one who makes everything better? For so long, their worth was entangled with usefulness. Without that, they feel lost, empty, even meaningless. But this emptiness is sacred. It is the void from which true identity can be born. Jung would call it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Beyond the masks, beyond the roles, beyond the false identities others placed on you. Think of it like cleaning out a house. At first, when you remove the old furniture, the space feels empty, bare, almost unsettling. But only in that emptiness can new furniture arrive, new beauty take root. The empath's life, once stripped of false roles, becomes an open space, and into that space flows authenticity, creativity, passion, and truth. But here's the part nobody talks about. When empaths reclaim their no, they also reclaim their yes. Because a yes that is forced, given out of fear or guilt, is not a true yes, it is a hidden no. But once an empath learns to say no with confidence, their yes becomes powerful. It is no longer the yes of obligation, it is the yes of desire, of joy, of alignment. And people feel the difference. A yes born of truth carries an energy that transforms. It is magnetic. It is alive. Let me share another story. Sarah, a lifelong empath, was known in her family as the peacemaker. Every holiday she smoothed conflicts, took on tasks, and absorbed attention. One year, she decided she could not do it anymore. She said no to hosting, no to taking sides, no to being the silent glue. Her family was outraged. Some accused her of being selfish. Others withdrew their affection. But something remarkable happened. After the initial chaos, the family began to adjust. They had to. Others stepped up. Arguments unfolded and resolved without her intervention. And Sarah, for the first time, felt what it was like to belong without performing. She realized her worth was not tied to her usefulness. Her no created space for her family to grow and for her to finally rest. But wait until you hear this. When the empath stops pleasing, they not only transform their relationships, they transform their nervous system. Years of chronic stress, overextension, and self-betrayal leave imprints in the body. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, cortisol floods the bloodstream. The empath lives in a state of hypervigilance, always scanning for what others need. Saying no interrupts this cycle. It teaches the body a new pattern, safety and authenticity. Over time, the body relaxes. Sleep deepens. Energy returns. The empath is no longer drained, because they are no longer leaking their power to everyone else. And here's the spiritual layer. Saying no is not rejection, it is alignment. It is saying yes to the soul's calling. Jung believed the psyche is guided by an inner compass, what he called the self. Every no that honors your truth is actually a yes to the self. It is the psyche moving closer to wholeness. The empath, once trapped in the archetype of the martyr, evolves into the archetype of the sovereign. They are no longer ruled by others' needs. They rule themselves. Think of it like a kingdom. For years, the empath's castle gates were wide open. Anyone could enter, take what they wanted, and leave. The empath, desperate to be liked, never closed the gates. But when they finally learn boundaries, the gates close. Not in cruelty, but in wisdom. Only those with respect are allowed in. And here's the twist. When the kingdom is protected, its beauty flourishes. The gardens bloom. The rivers run clear. The empath's inner world, once neglected, begins to thrive. So the question is this: are you willing to let the old roles die, to endure the temporary storm of guilt, so you can step into the authenticity waiting on the other side? Because here's the mystery: pleasing may win you temporary approval, but refusing to please wins you your soul. And in the end, that is the only thing worth saving.